Welcome to Season 3 of The Bows Know, the podcast where we will talk to students, teachers, staff, administrators, and more to share their stories from the world of education. I'm your host, Mr. Bows, and I hope you enjoy this podcast. Today's podcast, we are going to talk about TeachFX, and I have a guest in a virtual studio with me today. So thank you for joining me, and please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. Hi, Bows. My name is Scott Wolf. I am on the partner success team at TeachFX. So based on your intro, I guess I'm an and more.
Awesome. So thanks again for joining. So I like to start out my podcast with a couple of icebreaker type questions. So sure. You do have a background from education, which we'll get into that in a little bit. But what's your favorite story or tradition from your time in schools?
Oh my gosh, that's a difficult question. Thinking about traditions, I can think about some first day traditions, some introductory traditions. I taught English language arts, but I also taught drama. And so I was kind of big into icebreaker games, community building activities, things like that. And I think learning names in the classroom is important. So I would play a name game where students would have to pair their name with an action or a descriptor that started with the same first letter of their first name. So you could be interesting Ian, or I could be stupendous Scott, and they also had to do some sort of little gesture that associated with it. And we went around the circle and we had to continue repeating, and it felt really sort of groany and cheesy and corny at the time, but some of them would really stick. I remember I had a student named Adam who was Action Adam, who everyone in the class called him that for the whole year. So that's sort of the first, I guess, tradition or ritual that came to my mind when you asked that question.
That's awesome. I've done a few of those in my days. All right. So the next one is, if you could have a superpower, which one would it be and why?
Superpower. Flying feels like the low-hanging fruit. I'm pretty uninterested in some of the basics like time travel or reading other people's minds or invisibility. Those kind of, I see the downside of those. So let's just say flying, or I guess the ability to transport from one place to another place really quickly. So I never have to worry about taking the train or the bus or an airplane again. Save a lot of time that way.
Yeah, I was going to say, as someone who I know travels quite a bit, would give you some time back in your day for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Last, before we start diving into talking about TeachFX. My school has three qualities, or three traits, I guess: quality, integrity, respect. So out of those three, which one is your favorite? Do you feel like is most important, and why?
I like those three as a unit because my instinct says it's hard to have one or two without the others. But I think it all comes down to respect, right? Respect is sort of at the base or the foundation of any of those other qualities or traits. Respect makes me think of the way that we treat other people. And I suppose that's most important to me.
Very good. All right, so let's dive in. But before we get too deep, let's talk a little bit more about you. You mentioned English language arts and drama. So kind of what's, your elevator pitch story? Like, how did you get into education, and then how did you end up at TeachFX?
Sure. I had great teachers growing up. I was extremely lucky. I didn't go to undergrad to study to be a teacher. And I spent a few years after college doing that thing where you kind of wander and figure it out and find yourself. But what I kept coming back to is that my role models growing up were my high school teachers. They changed my life. I had wonderful connections to them. And I realized if I could have even a fraction of the impact on young people that they had on me, that would have been a worthy life, and a life having been worth lived. And so I went back to get my master's in education. I live in Chicago. I taught in Chicago public schools, like I mentioned, ELA and drama. But the journey to TeachFX, like so many transitions, starts during COVID. and virtual learning and the transition back to in-person learning. And all teachers experience that struggle and students struggle during that time. And I became even more focused or even more passionate about student engagement and empowering student voice and celebrating the heroics of teachers, but also helping equip them to be more responsive to student needs. And so that's when I transitioned into the education technology space and eventually joined the partner success team at TeachFX.
That's awesome. There was definitely a lot to reevaluate and think about during COVID and then immediately after it, for sure. So let's not keep everybody in suspense any longer. Let's talk about what exactly is TeachFX?
That's a great question. Drum roll, please. TeachFX, in short, is an app that teachers can use to make audio recordings of their classes, and then they receive automated feedback about what happened during that lesson. And that feedback is about what we call high leverage instructional practices that we know, based on research, are associated with things like higher levels of student engagement and increased student outcomes. And so those pedagogical practices are things like asking open-ended questions, asking focusing questions, waiting after asking a question, praising positive behavior, providing opportunities to respond, pressing student thinking, even sort of high-level student-teacher talk ratios. I'm curious, Bose, as someone who has used TeachFX, does that summary kind of align with your experience? Would you add anything?
No, I think that is a good summary. It's a wonderful tool that I think my usage of it just scratched the surface of its potential. And that was not the tool. That was just me first time using it, first year using it, exploring what it can do and its potential.
Of course. And I think we're only scratching the surface in terms of the product that we currently have versus the product we want to create. We're always gathering feedback. We're always innovating and iterating. We're releasing a new version of the product for back to school this school year, and we can talk about that if you want to. But I think we're in the same place. The conversation we had and the context in which we met was an opportunity for us to learn from users and teachers who had even just tried it out, like yourself, and learning what was your perspective, what was your feedback, what was your experience, and that's really helpful for us.
Yeah, so I want to talk more of the specifics, but I know the first thing that especially teachers listening to this are going to be like, wait a minute, you just said record my classroom.
Sure did.
So, I could speak to it, but I think, why don't you speak to, it is an audio recording. There's no video component to it.
Which is, I think.
Yeah, well, and I imagine that based off what you guys are trying to do, and we're going to talk a little more about the power of AI a little later, but the current power of AI, the visual recognition maybe isn't quite ready for the analysis teachers would need yet. But so teachers record, what happens to that audio?
Yeah, I think when I'm talking to teachers, first and foremost thing I want them to know is we view this tool as a personal, private reflection. No one besides you can listen back to that audio or see the insights and reports that you receive. This is not Big Brother in the sky. No one is watching you. That includes your principal or district admin or school leaders. So that data is sort of personal and private and safe with you. I think a benefit to just the audio recording, as opposed to doing some sort of video recording as well, is we think listening back to that recording with some key moments plucked out like we do on our end is a really important way to reflect on your teaching practice. And I think just listening is different than listening and watching, and isolating just the audio leads to a more specific and more powerful reflection when it comes to the instructional practices that we're particularly interested in looking at. There are physical things that teachers do in the classroom that are worth reflecting on. That's just kind of not the tact or not the angle that we're approaching things right now.
Yeah, and I know that was one of the things we talked about when we met, was that kind of that long-term like potential of like tracking, like, well, do I stand next to one group of students for too long? Do I stand in one portion of the classroom too long? So
yeah, these questions about equity are really important and things that we're after. I would say video recording is not really on the roadmap for us at the moment. So not something to worry yourself about. I think something that's helpful about the audio also, and we continue to improve at this, is how quickly teachers are able to receive that feedback. It's gone from taking, at the beginning of our company, it maybe took half a day for that insights to process and for teachers to receive those reports. Now it can happen in less than an hour. And so I think teachers need that feedback fast. We've learned that.
Yeah, well, the two things there I want to kind of touch on and talk about a little bit is you talked about that it's, you guys view it as teacher personal reflection. And as a teacher, I found that wonderful because it wasn't something that was being mandated. It wasn't something that like, hey, you have to do this, because I know for me, my personal experience, anytime something is mandated, even if it's the best thing in the world, it just comes with a little bit of baggage that, well, someone's making me do this.
Totally. And we find that the best implementations, the best models, teachers are opting into this work as opposed to it being something extra on their plate. Teachers have enough.
Yeah, and my work with Impact, it really has shown that like teachers are professionals, but teachers need to be ready to grow and learn. And I'm not saying all teachers aren't, because all teachers are. But everybody has a season and a time and a place, and you've got to be ready for the feedback that you get when you ask for it.
Yeah, teachers need to enter this work in their own way, on their own time. The lessons that you record on TeachFX can be as long as you want. Sometimes teachers record every period of their day. Sometimes teachers record 15 minutes of a class once a week. You're deciding when to record, how much to record, how long you're recording. And so, like you said, teachers are autonomous in terms of their usage of TeachFX for sure.
And so teachers kind of are I feel like in a crossroads with AI in terms of, do we fear it? Do we embrace it? How much do we embrace it? And what can we do? And I think TeachFX is a great way for teachers to embrace TeachFX and improve their practice. So let's kind of talk a little bit about, okay, so I've recorded my lesson, and then through the use of a couple different AI models and transcription, I get a report. So, I've used it so we can kind of go back and forth about what's in it, but like, let's tell everybody, like, what do they get after that 30 minutes or an hour of analysis time? What do they get back?
Yeah, so the report, again, I mentioned this is going to include insights around some of those high-level instructional practices. So the first thing you'll see at the top of your report, a lesson summary. This is what occurred in your lesson today. You'll receive, and this is a fan favorite, an AI-generated image that corresponds to the words or the discussions that were happening in your classroom. I know of teachers who share that image with their students. Can be a cool student engagement technique as well. Once you scroll down, you'll be able to see sort of ESPN SportsCenter top moments, highlights from your lesson. These are moments that we want to pull out and really highlight for you that you can go back and listen back to, specifically around whatever high leverage instructional practice you're focusing on in what we call that cycle. This cycles experience is going to be the sort of next version that we're releasing for next school year. But you can take a look at other insights as well. Some other favorites that maybe I haven't mentioned yet are a word cloud. What words are your students using versus what words are you using? Who's actually using the academic language in your classroom? How many questions are you asking? What types of questions? I mentioned student-teacher talk ratios, but that also includes group talk. So anytime there's more than one voice occurring in the class, as well as silence. Anything that you found interesting that I'm forgetting? The reports can be pretty thorough, and it'll be important for teachers to take ownership over deciding what do I really want to focus on from that report. And I think the next version of our product will enable that a bit more easily.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything else to call out, but like I did like the AI generated image. I didn't use it with my students, but it was kind of for me that check of is that what I wanted to happen in class that day kind of thing.
Exactly.
There were a couple recordings where I was just like, oh yeah, maybe I did spend a little too much time talking with groups on side conversations because it picks up on that. It's like that has nothing to do with math.
Yeah, but again, something I probably should have mentioned is that these reports are never judgmental or evaluative. They're not telling you what you're doing right or wrong. It's not telling you this is how you can be a better teacher. It's objective and hopefully positive, celebratory, uplifting, more so than critical. Teachers are the experts. We're not trying to tell you what to teach, maybe some slight tweaks to how you are teaching.
Yeah, and I think as teachers, it's kind of ingrained, like, oh, you got to have the wait time, you got to let the students talk. But I like the breakdown of the group talk. Like, is it one? So it's not like, in a more traditional student sitting, you calling on students kind of classroom, like you're like, okay, yeah, I got to make sure I call on everybody, and you might have that. But with the TeachFX, you really get to see like, oh, was it just a series of students talking, or were the students talking to each other? And that's kind of, a switch I made in my practice towards, has all the different buzzwords from different people who sell a product or sell a series of strategies, but it's active learning, where the students are the ones doing the conversing and the learning and the problem solving and everything. So that was great to see for me of like, there was more teacher talk than I thought, but that's because I had my recording device with me. Mm-hmm. So as I talked to the different groups of my students, it picked that up.
That's interesting. I like that you mentioned sort of who's doing the work, who's carrying the cognitive load. As a teacher, I would finish up a class or finish up the school day and just be so exhausted, so drained, physically, mentally, and of course, to some extent, that's the nature of things. But it made me wonder, why are my students the ones that are this exhausted? They should be doing much more of the work than me in class. Like you said, whatever buzzword or phrase, active learning, the person doing the talking is the person doing the learning. We all have different ways that we've heard that or learned that or phrased that, but I think you're spot on in terms of what we're trying to be responsive to. Yeah. Who's actually bearing the weight of the learning?
Yeah, and I also liked it was kind of like the moments that get called out towards the end of the report where you can listen back to conversations. Because there were days where like, it felt good, but as a teacher, I couldn't be like, oh, that one moment, that's why today felt good or whatever. But then you get the report and you kind of look and you can listen back and you're like, oh yeah, that's why it felt good. I was asking the right questions. They were asking the right questions. The learning was happening. And that was really nice to see in some of the reports.
Yeah, you mentioned things like wait time are ingrained into us as teachers. But are we really accurate judges of how long wait time we're providing? What can feel like forever to a teacher can feel like nothing at all to students. And it's the same thing with that teacher talk versus student talk ratio. Are we really the best judges of how much we're talking? Our perception does not always match reality. And I think that's a common experience when teachers look at their very first TeachFX report is saying, oh my gosh, am I really talking that much? And sometimes just holding up the mirror is important, not being judgmental, not being critical. Different lessons have different intentions, different teachers have different styles. There's no one right way to do things, but just to have an awareness of this is objectively what happened in your classroom. And if that matches up, if that aligns with what your goals were, awesome, you rock. But if it doesn't, We want you to know that.
Yeah, and I think it kind of gets to where I want to go, talking about like the use cases currently for TeachFX, but the idea that, I'm in an ed leadership program right now, and the recurring theme is, teacher leaders don't have enough time to do all the things they should be doing, and it's, teachers, anybody needs feedback to grow, but school leaders don't have the time to necessarily go through the coaching cycles with their teachers that they would really like to, because, if you've got 4 principals and 200 teachers, like you just have enough time to check all the boxes, let alone return and have the phone call, or not the phone calls, to have the conversations, which I think is where TeachFX fits in a nice niche, in whether it's teachers reflecting individually, or, I don't know if you guys have whole schools using it or whole departments using it, could see that working out well as in like a professional learning community aspect of like, well, let's look at all of our reports. Let's, have conversations.
Yeah, we do have full schools that use TeachFX. And I think the best implementations involve, like you're describing, PLCs coming together, sharing their data, collaborating over it. That's high level. That's a big ask. We're working towards that with all of our partners. But I think, like you mentioned, the easiest sort of in or use case is to say, as a teacher, how many observations do we have? First of all, very few. And second of all, how many of those observations don't feel super evaluative, right? Aren't tied to things like, how are you doing at your job? I think all teachers have also had the experience of an AP or an instructional coach coming into their class for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then they leave, and then the great thing happens, right? Like, oh, why didn't you stay one more minute? You would have seen that. Or they come in right after that amazing discussion, and then the students aren't talking anymore. So they didn't really see the meat and potatoes of that lesson. I wish you saw another moment. And so with TeachFX, you don't have to wait for that AP or that instructional coach to be in your room. You don't have to worry about whether they saw the right 5, 10, 15-minute chunk of their lesson. The power's in your hands. You hit record, you hit stop recording, and then you have that report, and it can be for you. You can share it with a PLC or a course team. You can share it with an AP or an instructional coach. And we try to help coach teachers around how to have those conversations, as well as school leaders about how to have those conversations with folks that they're coaching or observing.
Very good. So with that, like, who are the current, like, obviously, the product is growing and expanding, and you're, looking for new partners and stuff, but who's the current use cases? Is it individual schools? Is it school districts? Is it, is it just organizations like the one that we met through Impact Florida? Like,
yeah, it sort of runs the gamut. We have small schools, we have large districts, we have sort of programs like Impact Florida, and we learn from all these partners. We try to ask questions and see what we can apply to the next partner or the next conversation, or what's sort of unique to that specific use case or institution. So it's pretty broad right now. I don't know if I can zoom in and say, this is exactly who should be using the product. But I think any school or any teacher who believes in the brilliance of their students and wants that to be shared further and more widely, that's who should be using this product.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great, I hate to use the term force multiplier, because for me, that has some connotations to it, but that's really what it has the potential to do for a school leadership team or a department, is provide more feedback and more data that is hard to collect otherwise. Like, you have to be have nicer handwriting and faster handwriting than I do to document all the stuff that, TeachFX can record by simply just pressing the record button.
Yeah, my handwriting is the worst, which is the real reason I joined TeachFX.
That's why I teach math. Okay, so TeachFX utilizes AI. So as someone who was a teacher, works in education technology with AI, like philosophically, what do you see as one potential future of AI in K-12 specifically?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this because I think TeachFX is unique in the ed tech AI intersection. TeachFX was a company before things like Chat GPT became public. This is not generative AI. I can get a little bit deeper, not super deep, but I can get a little bit deeper into what's actually going on behind the scenes. But I believe, and I think TeachFX as a company believes this as well, that the best use of AI in education is to drive innovations that power human interactions in the classroom, not replace them. And so I guess philosophically, I'm interested in AI that leans into the brilliance of teachers and allows them to shine and complements what they already do really well so that they can create more positive and more healthy interactions in the classroom.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I was just at a conference July 1st and 2nd, and there was a company there that was involving AI in their software kind of for the first time, and it was for generative math problems. Mm-hmm. Like if a student is like, hey, I want some more practice here, or if the software decides, hey, you need some more practice, they're, generating more math questions along those lines. So I definitely.
And that's cool, right? That saves the teacher time, that allows the student to practice a skill, maybe in a way they wouldn't have been able to before. I'm not trying to be critical of anything like that. I think that can be a super powerful tool as well. I guess I'm an optimist, and I guess I'm a bit of a dreamer, and I think that we can do more.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, when you think about the Industrial Revolution, robots are going to take our jobs and whatever. It's like that's already happened. It just took the current job and created new ones. So I like your take on it, and I think that's probably where I land too. Is AI? We need to figure out ways to support the people with it, and to take time off of it, because I know my experience with TeachFX is amazing, but I still needed a person to kind of debrief what I got with. So there, it's a force multiplier. It can give teachers feedback. It can be that reflective tool, but ultimately, the school leaders still need to provide a coach or a PLC or a group of people to kind of parse through what their information is and kind of talk to each other about it. And whether that's local to the school or whether it turns into some sort of national TeachFX like groups of people that want to talk about stuff. Like,
if only. Do you know any? Would love the introduction. So yeah, I think TeachFX is most effective when it's integrated into priorities that already exist in the school. And that gets back to the idea that there isn't a singular use case. It's context dependent, it's partner dependent, it's school culture dependent. It's not sort of a one size fits all solution. And we want, like you said, people to be active collaborators and participants in the implementation. This is to drive and power human interactions, not replace them.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that because I think that's perfect. All right, so we've talked a lot about TeachFX. We talked a lot about the amazing things that it does. So if teachers or if teachers or school leaders are listening and are interested, where can they go to learn more about TeachFX and how it could potentially fit into what they're doing?
Sure. The place to start would be teachfx.com. That's our website where you'll be able to see a little bit more of what the product's all about, some research and case studies, testimonials, ways to contact us. Am I allowed to provide my email address on this podcast as well?
Go for it.
I'm happy. be in touch with any teachers that have questions and want to speak to a person. So that's just my name, Scott, SCOTT, at teachfx.com. Truly my favorite part of the job is having these conversations with teachers, celebrating their successes with them, guiding them through challenges, facilitating professional learning, and even just answering any technical questions. So if you want to chat, I'm here for you.
Awesome. So you actually said in that something that I wanted to talk about but forgot about. So in working with all of your partners, have you guys done any data analysis on your own in terms of, improvement that teachers and schools and stuff have seen?
Yes, big time. The research wing of our company is robust. In Orlando, you met Alyssa, who is the head of our research team, and she's wonderful and brilliant. And on teachfx.com, you can see some of the randomized control trials that we've done at major universities, Stanford, for example. At a high level, we show that using TeachFX increases the presence of these high leverage instructional practices that we know equate to more student engagement and better student outcomes. Our research shows even simple things like as the number of TeachFX recordings that a teacher does increases, that student talk bar, that student talk percentage, that also increases. If you want to learn more, I would encourage you to check out that research on our website.
Yeah, I think it's, even for myself, just the idea of that an observation happened, like that I was looking at it, made me more aware of it. And I mean, I like that it's nothing new. You guys aren't really saying, hey, look at this new research we did in a classroom full of 20 people that worked really well. It's like, this is all the stuff that everybody over the last 100 years have been saying works really well in the classroom. We're just going to be here to help support you do all of those amazing things.
Yeah, and you mentioned intention. It's a mindset thing, right? If you have an intention for your lesson, this is my goal, this is what I'm trying to do, and I know I'm going to receive immediate feedback about it, even that subtle mindset tweak increases these things and assists with these things. I sort of equate it to wearing a Fitbit. Like if you just know that your steps are being tracked, you get more steps. It's sort of the same idea.
Yeah, and for me, it kind of helped me kind of take some risks because I didn't have to wait 3 weeks to get test results back to know if it worked. If I wanted to try it.
More about the types of risks that you were willing to take?
So, changing how I taught a specific lesson or, changing how I approach something. Like with the TeachFX recordings, I was able to immediately get the recording, see, and kind of look at and decide, okay, did this do what I wanted to do? Yes or no? And the immediacy, I might not have been able to change for the next class, but I got 2 classes worth of data before lunch and then could decide, do I keep doing it after lunch or do I need to, during lunch, rework and figure something else out? And I think there's a lot of power, as you said, in that immediate feedback, not only so that you can course correct, but it allows you to kind of take a little more chance because you don't have to wait till the end of the day to think about it, or you don't have to wait until the quiz the next day to find out if something worked or not.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned looking at the quiz or looking at test results. There's research that shows that teachers spend a ton of time looking at test data, and it actually doesn't have much of an equivalence to increasing student outcomes. And I think this connects to the conversation about TeachFX, because when you're looking at student test data, you might see where the gaps in knowledge are or where reteaching might need to happen. But most often, teachers are going to go back and teach it the exact same way, right? And so the idea is less about what material do I need to teach or reteach. It's how can I teach a little bit differently? If I'm teaching the same material in the same way, why would I expect the results to be much different, right?
Right.
That's just interesting about taking a look at test data.
All righty. Is there anything else you wanted to share about TeachFX before we wrap up for the day? I don't want to keep you too much from your schedule today.
No, I really appreciated this conversation. This was a ton of fun. It's an honor to be on the Bo's Notes.
Yeah, it'll be something different, and hopefully might inspire some people to check out TeachFX.
I hope so. And I hope you stay in touch as you continue to use TeachFX this coming school year.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I let you go, though, do you have any recommendations for our listeners? Any books they should read, podcasts they should check out, TV shows, anything like that?
Oh my gosh. Does it have to be relevant to TeachFX?
No, absolutely not.
General recommendation?
Yeah, just general recommendations.
Okay. I'm in Chicago, so obviously I love The Bear, and I'm in the middle of season 3, and it's a cooking show, but it's also just a love letter to Chicago. It's pretty intense, but if you haven't checked out The Bear, that's very top of mind for me right now.
All right, very good. So that wraps up another episode of The Bo's Nose. Thank you to Scott for taking the time to sit down with me, and I hope you enjoyed your time. Listeners, if you like the podcast, subscribe on your favorite podcast player of choice so you don't miss out on future episodes, and please share with your friends. Until next time, excellence in all endeavors.